Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this tutorial section on Southern Africa. Again, in this last section, we'll be considering the topic arrival of Europeans in Southern Africa 1500 to 1800 and the foundation of European hegemony, looking at the colonists, the farmers, the ranchers, and the systems created by the Dutch in Southern Africa between 1500 and 1800. Of course, one of the major impacts of the coming of the European was a new interaction between Europe and the other world in the 15th century, which created new political systems, cultural assimilation, beliefs, and new pattern of economic relations, including economic structures such as exploitations, domination, and creation of institutions that actually subdued indigenous people in Southern Africa. But before we progress, it is very, very important, as I told you in a class, that there is a strong connection between events in Europe before the 15th century and what unfolded in Southern Africa, just like in East Africa and West Africa, beginning from the 15th century when the global connections will actually are made. The connection between Europe and Africa in the 15th century. So, as we've noted in the class, this has to do with economic, social, and political crisis in Europe, before the 15th century. Of course, the first is the economic, which was attributed to food scarcity and food insecurity in Europe before the 15th century. I noted explicitly in the class that the fall of Constantinople to the Turks in 1453 given the urgency for a new route to Asia. In Europe, there was this urgency for the European states to find an alternative route to Asia due to a major development in Europe. So, what was this major development? Of course, it was the rise of Ottoman empires. I'm going to state, shortly. Before the 15th century, Europe had relied on the Far East for cheap access to goods and several resources, especially food resources, a process which started through political conquest and expansion by Macedon, Hellenistic powers, Rome, and Asiatic powers, was enhanced by the growth of trade between Europe and the Far East as far back as the 10th century. So, as far back as the 10th century, there had been in existence a viable connection, economic relationship between Europe and Far East, trading with each other in agricultural produce. This was the major source of food sustainability in Europe. The European state had developed great trade relations with India, from where spices was acquired, was brought. As a matter of fact, the economy of European states was very much dependent on this boom of this trade with Asia, where they got spices, pepper, ginger, and all sort of agricultural commodities. So it is, in other words, to say that before the 1453, the direct link to Asia was made possible by the commanding position of Constantinople. I told you in the class, where was Constantinople? Constantinople is present day Istanbul. And where is Istanbul in the global map? Istanbul is the capital of Turkey. All right. So where is Turkey in the global map? Turkey is located in where? In Eastern Europe. All right. So of course, the connection. Turkey is just like a border, a fence between Eastern Europe and Asia. All right. So the threat of the Turks on Constantinople was significant, for more than just the fear of the great Roman Empire's fall. It was a catastrophic, event for the Europeans, for the Turks, to block, the only access route in Constantinople. So it also meant that the trade which had boomed between Asia and Europe, would decline. All right, this major source of supply for food security in Europe will be threatened. So when Constantinople fell and the easy link Europe once enjoyed, to Asia became crumbled, it was just a matter of time. It was expedient, it was imperative, or it was apposite, that another route be discovered to Asia. And this was one of the major factor that led to the European discovery of South Africa, America, and Asia, especially also since the Turks had blocked the former route. If another alternative route was not sought, a diminishing effect, a catastrophic and devastating effect will be unleashed on European economy. And of course, this paved the way for the voyage of exploration. But as I've noted in the class, the reasons for the voyage of exploration was not limited to the economic crisis in Europe. There was also other factors such as the Renaissance factor and also the religious crisis in Europe that precipitated also the voyage. Of course, historically, I noted that Europe during the Middle Ages, was predominantly religious. All right, one of the major problems in Europe during the Middle Ages, that is from 476 to 1550 AD, was the predominance of religion. Like Karl Marx would know, religion was the opium of the European society during this period, following the acceptance of Christianity in Roman Empire and its elevation over and above learning and also above the state. So, given this proclivity, given the overbearing religious orientation, medieval European society snowballed or dovetailed into backwardness and ignorance, primitive, or if you like. All right, there was no relegation of social advancement in Europe, and this actually was brought to bear. All right, in terms of the classical knowledge, philosophy, metaphysics, and science characteristic of ancient Greek and Roman societies disappeared because of the ways in which religion actually permeated European society. Christian philosophy created by Ambrose of Milan, Augustine of Hippo, and Bonaventura and Thomas Aquinas now provided the basis for engagement, rules of engagement in all departments of life, either in economic, in politics, in social, in every department of life. Religion was the measure through which people interacted, or process or rationalize things in Europe. But however, unfortunately, there was a transformation, subsequently, with the revival of learning, that is the Renaissance, the birth of learning, occasioned or precipitated by the emergence of universities of Oxford, 1096, universities of Paris, 1150. Coupled with also the rediscovery of the Aristotelian ideas, some of the ancient writings of ancient scholars like Aristotle. All of this created doctrinal controversies, polemics, misunderstanding, leading to the challenge of Christian orthodoxy and also the conventional wisdom. All right, people began to challenge the essence of Christianity. Especially, there were quite a number of decolonial movement. Of course, the Martin Luther King movement was actually associated with this episode in European history. Also was that of the John Calvin movement, the Calvinist movement. Those who challenged the idea that children of the bishop must naturally grow to be eligible for ordination to be bishops. Some of this, like Martin Luther King movement, challenge the issue of salvation. They claim that salvation is by grace, and that of the John Calvin emphasized that justification is by faith, not by election or not by natural ordination. And all of this was as a result of the rebirth of knowledge, Renaissance. Of course, this was also consequent upon the writings of scholars like Marsilio of Padua and others. With all of these activities, religion was relegated to the background where it belonged, and its power cascaded and plummeted. That is what we noted demonstrably. Of course, this was subsequently accentuated. It was followed, in other words, by the Renaissance, 1350 to 1500. Then followed by the revival of ancient culture, civilization, and learning, which culminated in the scientific revolution 1600, and the eventual rise of the industrial revolution 1750s, and also the modern technology. That is the maritime revolution, these are some of the major events in Europe. Of course, I also mentioned that there was also the religious factor in addition to Renaissance and economy. People were trying to escape out of Europe, just like the way people are trying to japa from Nigeria in the contemporary period now. So the we need to historicize japa, the history of japa. All right, it is not a recent phenomenon. Europeans during the 15th century, 14th and 15th century, jackpot from Europe, in an astronomical proportion because of religious persecution. All right, which is where, of course, if you have read the works of Flavius Josephus in his popular book called Antiquity, that's a very classical literature where he noted explicitly that as a result of the persecution of the Christian community or society in Europe, the Calvinist followers and Martin Luther King, as a result of the elimination and extermination of this Christian faith, the blood of the Christians that were killed in Europe, were flowing through the gutters and they were quenching the fires in the city. All right, so this actually was one of the reasons why it was imperative for people to seek alternative means of livelihood elsewhere outside Europe. Like people were jackpotting, people jackpot from Europe, looking for a place. And this was, of course, eventually made possible also through quite a number of innovations in Europe, with several agencies and states actors supporting and sponsoring knowledge, the quest, the search for knowledge. Of course, quite a number of investments were actually made by the king of Spain and that of Portugal, in the field of geography, in the field of astronomy, in the field of shipbuilding, marine engineering, and technology. So Europeans subsequently began to test waters and travel land, that could bring a new way to Asia. For while the absence of any known route ought to have ended the trade, as we have noted, the economies, the European economies had become much sustained by this trade to end. So it was certainly compulsory, imperative, or sacrosanct for states to desire to maintain a stable economy. States who desire to maintain a stable economy had to discover a new route to Asia. So this was the beginning of the voyage of exploration that actually led to discoveries of America, South America, West Africa, South Africa, and other parts of Asia, and all the stuff. Of course, as I've mentioned, it was driven by the quest to discover an alternative route to Asia. So the Spanish and the Portuguese were the first to be determined to get to seek to discover the new routes to the rich sources of trade in the Far East. From the second half of the 15th century, Europe earnestly sought a new route to avoid the impending economic catastrophe that would face Europe if such lucrative Asian trade was ended. So the determination of the state of Europe to set out into the unknown and mobilize their resources, both man and material, for finding new routes. This actually paved the way for the voyage of exploration. Of course, we've noted that the wealth of any state in Europe at the time and the economic development rested solely on the India trade. And if this route was not sought, that means the European economy will be plummet and also will become an anachronism. So this was the beginning of the voyage of exploration in Europe. Among the new places discovered was Southern Africa, as we have noted, while the first explorer, Christopher Columbus, discovered the Bahamas, Mexico, Florida, and quite a number of places in South and North America. Other actors came on board, following the example of Christopher Columbus, who pioneered the discovery in 1479. For instance, Bartholomew Dias left Lisbon in Portugal in 1487 in a quest to discover a new route to Asia. As we have noted explicitly, he followed the coast beyond the Congo, but he was driven out of the sea, as we have noted. Of course, when the storm abated, Dias discovered the westerly wind that helped him to sail across the Atlantic Of course, in this case, he accidentally, just like Christopher Columbus, accidentally discovered, the Florida, Mexico, Bahamas, and quite a number of areas in North America. Christopher Bartholomew Diaz also discovered accidentally the Moselle Bay, which was about 200 miles east of the Cape. So Diaz and his crew, of course, did not go beyond the Cape for the fears and uncertainties associated with, the journey. Actually caused the crew to retreat, back to Portugal. Of course, he was unable to get to India, but a major achievement had been made, recorded in the history of the Portuguese voyage of exploration. So Diaz, named the place Cape of Storm and also returned to Portugal. So he was welcomed in Portugal by the King John II of Portugal, who sponsored his voyage. Though while he had not gone to Asia, neither did he return, with any spies. But an important factor is that Bartholomew Diaz became a Portuguese hero because while he did not reach Asia or India, he had discovered the Cape. So, of course, the King of Portugal, King John II, renamed the Cape of Good Hope, discovered by Diaz, and here laid the new route to India, as we are going to demonstrate in the remainder of this class. So the discovery of the Cape was important, but it would be useless if it was not followed with more explorations and voyages. For it in itself, as we have noted, was not the reason of the journey. The essence, the cardinal imperative, the modus vivendi, or if you like, the modus operandi of the voyage of exploration was to seek, a route to India. Thus, in 1497, Vasco da Gama, set again sailing from Portugal, determined, and was decisive to find a way, the route to India. So Diaz discovered, we noted that he had discovered the Cape, which positively showed the possibility of a route to Asia. So, of course, he demonstrated that if this route was followed keenly, Da Gama would probably find ultimately the route to Asia. So he made larger preparation this time. He went with bigger ships and a better, more sophisticated crew, or and also the technologies that could withstand whatever storm the sea threw, and also to withstand the longer journey of going further to the Cape. So on his way, he landed at Moselle Bay on 22nd of November 1497. So in this case, the first contact between the Europeans and the Khoikhoi took place, and Da Gama, bartered, exchanged ornaments for Khoikhoi's cattle and also other various agricultural commodities. So the journey continued northwards, the Cape. By this time, Europe had found a new route to the trading empires of the Indian Ocean. So, of course, this was, the process of the incorporation of the economy, the land, the society, and even the patrimony of Southern Africa into the vortex or orbit of global capitalism, as you have noted. Of course, he got to Malindi, where an Indian Gujarati pilot, known as Malemokana, guided the Portuguese, to Calicut. In this case, Vasco da Gama, returned to Portugal in 1499 with a cargo of spices that paid for the expedition, 60 times over. This was a remarkable achievement for the Portuguese. Of course, while it was simply the route to India and the link between Europe and Asia, a critical factor is that whatever power that controlled the Cape would easily block the trade route from Europe and Asia. So the Europeans, the Portuguese realized that it was imperative, that a system be put in place at the Cape to regulate, to preserve, the interests of their country. So of course, this was later to be challenged, by other European explorers who came. As a matter of fact, this brought about the coming of the Dutch. So let's consider the coming of the Dutch in Southern Africa. After the Portuguese, it was the Dutch who, established their presence, their foot in Southern Africa. So the first Portuguese commerce, like Da Gama, as we have noted, in Southern Africa, did not appreciate the place. The notable factor there is that the Southern Africa, being temperate, could not provide any of the tropical commodities which made Eastern trade so profitable. The Southern African environment did not possess most of the profitable resources like spices and all the pepper and the stuffs needed by the Europeans. So also was the fact that its inhabitants, the Khoikhoi or the Otentos, were considered civilized and hostile to the Dutch, to the Portuguese. So they did not produce articles comparable with the silk and the metal and the spices of Asia. And of course, the Cape was thereby bypassed by Portugal. Portugal, what was important for Portugal was that it had discovered the route to Asia, and other European states followed, neglecting the Cape except the Dutch. So among the European states, the Dutch and the British East Indian Company had become most powerful, with the Dutch trade centered on the Indonesia island and that of the British, which focused on the mainland, Indian mainland, basically. So the journey on the long sea, however, was quite hazardous, as we have noted, and the ship going from Europe to Asia will probably need some refreshing, getting waters and vegetables, and this was, the factors that brought the Dutch into Southern Africa. As we have noted, the distance from Europe to Asia was several miles, and it was quite, improbable, to travel such a long distance at a go. Especially, it is crucial. It was considered, imperative that human crew members needed to refresh themselves, on real land, to take some clean water and vegetables, and also root, batter some meats, all right, with the koi while they relax themselves from the tediousness of the long journey. Of course, I told you that this is a critical factor, as I've told you, and this is a very, very important question to note, that might probably emanate in the exam. As I've told you, if you were given a question that meets fresh water and vegetable, how logical can this logically explain the making of a historical tragedy in Southern Africa? So you could see that it was the quest for meat, for fresh water and vegetable, that actually brought about the creation of the Dutch settlement in Southern Africa. Of course, again, I mentioned that among the first places created by the Dutch was St. Helena, which had been found useful, for this purpose. But of course, because St. Helena was quite very, very far away from, the route to Asia, so it was quite imperfect. It was too far from the trading center of Asia, and the need to stop again, would be necessary. So the Dutch felt rather that the Cape, which da Gama had initially found, would be more useful apposite rather than the St. Helena. So the ship began to stop at Table Bay, that is the Cape, which was the best place for them to rest. And of course, at this point, the Dutch had not considered the Cape to be of much more, of much of a significant place, until there was a Dutch shipwreck, at Table Bay, which is along the Cape. So it was recorded that crew, on their way to India, all right, some of the crewmen, struggled. There was a shipwreck, and some of the crewmen, struggled to, come out of the storms, and haven't sustained themselves, and finding themselves on the shore of the Cape. So they encountered the Khoi people, from whom they obtained vegetables, and also cattle. So of course, subsequently, the Dutch considered making this place a place for revitalization. All right, so it was suggested that the Cape, be used as a place of revitalization center. The reason was quite simple. The sailors that sustained themselves, they had shown the possibility of the Cape, to produce vegetables for ships. Also was the fact that it had clean water, and there was surplus cattle, from the Khoi, which could be used, all right, to feed the sailors and the crew members on their voyage to India. So as already noted, it was the best middle stop, also known as against St. Helena, because of its closeness, the proximity to Asia. So the Dutch East Indian Company understanding this geographical and strategic advantage of the Cape, estimated that this would be more productive, for the Dutch government. So in 1652, the Cape was officially recognized as a place where this Dutch ship could refresh and take vegetables, and preparations were begun to build it into a center for rest and resuscitation. Fundamentally, as already noted, of course, I've mentioned that for it to fully meet the needs of the ship, it was important for some people to remain at the Cape to prepare all that the ship would need for their further journey into Asia, such as planting vegetables, gardening, and establishing the Dutch physical presence at the Cape also. So in this case, the Dutch government in Europe commissioned or deployed and experienced a well-traveled sojourn in the name of Jan van Riebeck, along with 125 servants who were commissioned to establish the Dutch presence at the Cape. This was the first European settlement at the Cape that was established. So the mission of Riebeck and those who came with him was quite simple. Vegetables were to be grown to supply the passing ships with fresh food. Friendly relations were to be established with the Khoikhoi, the autochthonous people, especially cattle. And also a fort was to be built to house the European garrison and to act as a house for the sick sailor in the Cape. This was one of the making of historical tragedy in Southern Africa. Of course, it is noted that the new settlement at the Cape in its early stage was quite unproductive as needed or as was expected. As a matter of fact, in most cases, it was difficult for the garrison, the Dutch settlers at the Cape, to produce food to feed the ship. Rather, it was the passing ship who often had to provide for the people, and it became quite obvious that to sustain the Cape settlement and reduce the expenses on the Dutch government, more labor was to be brought to complement what was being produced by the people. Of course, the Dutch had to unequivocally free some of its prisoners and servants and gave them land at the Cape where they would grow crop and sell to the company and also export some to Europe. All right, some of the servants and prisoners in Europe, in Netherlands, were sent on a 12 years term to the Cape, all right, as part of their prison terms. Of course, these people eventually became one of the principal actors in the making of a historical tragedy and existential calamity in Southern Africa. All right. Okay, so these servants were made of free Boers, who were granted 13.5 margin, about 300 acres of land, which was to be free of any tax, for the next 12 years, as we have noted. Of course, this was done with a clear thought. The Cape had been explored, and it has to be developed, cultivated. All right, the Europeans lacking the population also, apart from people who were jackpine emigrating, they had to look into mobilizing the prisoners. Of course, the Khoikhoi by that period had not developed a settled life, as you have noted. The Khoikhoi and the San were improvident, while the Khoikhoi were nomadic in nature. They simply came to trade for cattle and barter their cattle for European goods at the Cape. Of course, there was also the factor that the Khoikhoi could not establish a presence at the Cape because of series of droughts, which greeted the area around the 17th century. So the land acquired by the Dutch Boers, the Dutch Boers, was significant in major ways, in the sense that, of course, it will alter the scheme of things, the dislocation and the dispossession of the indigenous people in Southern Africa. Of course, these Boers soon started expanding in population and consequently, subsequently spread beyond the shore, the jurisdiction, marked for them by Governor Jan van Riebeck, and ultimately, in a little time, they came in real contact with the autochthonous people, with the indigenous people in Southern Africa. Of course, with this, friction was bound to occur. The superiority of one was going to determine ownership and superiority All right, and all of this would centrifugally cause one group, to own almost perpetually the Southern Africa. This would probably result to the rise of various nationalism. Of course, as we have noted, we have the African nationalism and Afrikaner nationalism. The African nationalism represented the indigenous, the ancestral people in Southern Africa, the Khoikhoi, the San, the Bantu, the Zulu, all right, and other groups which we've considered in our class. So in this case, the most vulnerable of all of these groups, so this European incursion and infiltration and also the expropriation of their land, though the most vulnerable were the Khoisan, the Khoikhoi and the San, all right, because their ways of life was too casual to rigidly resist the conquest and expropriation of the land by the European. Unfortunately, in the history of man, it is difficult to see where men naturally gave up their sovereignty. Usually in the face of external incursion or aggression is always followed by resistance. Men naturally do not accept alien domination in absolute docility. But unfortunately for the San, because of their improvident nature, they were too fragile, and too flexible to resist this European incursion. So this situation actually altered the scheme of things in Southern Africa. But of course, with time, some of these indigenous people were reduced, by a number of factors which we consider subsequently. There was also shortage of labor, which of course led the Boers to resort to more immigration of the Dutch people. In 1657, Jan van Riebeck had to bring in more slaves from different parts, especially from Angola, even and the Indies, in a way to complement, to supply workforce, laborers for the Dutch Boers in their various agricultural and grazing plantations. So these slaves were men, just like the Boers themselves were men, prisoners who had been shipped from Europe. And because the natural problem of absence of women arose, it became a child of necessity, for Governor Javan Riebeck to encourage mixed marriages between the Dutch and the Boers and the Khoikhoi women. So this actually led to cultural affiliation, assimilation, and exchanges. Of course, there were also the suppression, intimidation, the molestation, the abuses of women, without mentioning of men. Of course, this led to demographic explosion in Southern Africa. The mixture, the intergroup marriages between each of these groups, exploded, the racial crisis in Southern Africa. And by the time Governor Riebeck was living in 1662, all right, the Cape had been fully established as a Dutch settlement, of course, with its own institutions, with an army, a governor, as we are going to demonstrate in the remainder when we're looking at the expansion of European presence and population in Southern Africa. Thank you.